the first part of this concepting phase is to really start to figure out the overall proportions of the character. So I do most of the work in this concepting phase at fairly low subdivision levels. I don't really step up too high too fast because most of the overall proportions can be solved in this at lower levels. So I kind of wanted to start with making him the typical sort of stereotypical Frankenstein look with the large forehead, downturned eyes in the outer corners, um, the thick, somewhat flat nose. So I'm just looking to block out some of these main features here, and this is mostly just using the grab brush in Mudbox to push and pull things around to start to lock things in, and just using the freeze brush here to lock down that lower lip so I can tweak the upper lip by itself. And while I'm doing this work, I'm looking at I have a dual monitor setup, so I'm always looking at reference on a second monitor, looking up the classic Frankenstein images and seeing what forms were on that original character and trying to mimic those types of forms on this concept sculpt. The concept sculpting here will take this up to a few subdivision levels, even though the full final concept sculpt was taken to a higher subdivision level. Um, the higher subdivision level sculpting will be covered in the on the posed character, so I don't want to be too redundant with the same type of material. So we'll take this up a few subdivision levels to work out the main proportions and the main forms, and then move into the resurfacing, and then the higher subdivision level sculpting will be showed a little bit later on with the full character sculpt while he's in pose. So again, just mostly looking at checking this model out from a lot of different angles. Making sure that the corners of the eyes and the corners of the mouth kind of pull back in space properly, and the forms don't become too flat on one particular plane. So I'm always looking at the model from a lot of different angles to sort things out. So here I'm just trying to work on that flat tip of the nose a little bit, and work on the thickness of the face and the cheekbones a little bit here, and defining the nasolabial folds where the creases are at the corners of the nose down to the corners of the mouth, and refining eye shape, getting that downturned corners of the eyes, from the side view. It really starts to read as those Frankenstein-esque downturned eyes in the corner. And he does have a fairly bulbous, distinct head shape, which I'm trying to work out a little bit here. One thing I do quite a bit is bounce around the model um, fairly quickly, and try not to get locked in too quickly in one area. It's for me, it's kind of important to bring everything up to the same level at the same time. So at this stage, I'm not focusing too much on one specific feature. It's really just a lot of moving around the model, things that catch my eye, I start to refine. And I'm working with symmetry here. I'm at a certain point, I obviously will break off from the symmetry, because that's going to be a fairly prominent feature of this character. Is the fact that he's been stitched together, is that he's going to be extremely asymmetrical. But at this phase, while I'm working on the overall proportions and trying to solve those sorts of things, I'm working with the with symmetry on, just to speed things up. And then once I'm happy with those proportions, then I can break the symmetry. So it's starting to get there. Sometimes I'll sculpt this stuff on a separate layer so I can toggle it on and off to see sort of what the changes have been. But starting this off from a very generic base mesh, it's pretty apparent what the changes are. Later on, I'll typically use various layers to experiment with things, and sort of toggle them on and off to see exactly what changes I've made. So starting to make more slightly more subtle changes at this point now. Um, bringing things up as a whole and then tweaking little areas. And I'm getting as much as I possibly can out of this subdivision level. I don't like when the mesh gets unmanageable just because of high subdivision level. So I really try to squeak out as much as I can from each subdivision level before going up any further. It just makes the process a little easier for me to manage. So I'm just approaching this from the side view and figuring out where these ears are and more of this cranium shape. And just highlighting some of that flap of skin there above the upper eyelid and how it overhangs and over that top lid and sort of creates a nice sort of fatty tissue area above that eyelid. And so usually this phase can take anywhere. This is a sped up clip, but I can concept this stuff out over the course of a few hours. Work out these main proportions and then move on to the actual full-on sculpt. And within, depending on how much time I have, within a day or 2 days, have a decent, fairly high resolution sculpted concept done. And then from there, it's if I like where it's gone, I can continue working on it by doing the full body of the character. But I do like kind of getting myself into a project this way by taking a sort of bite-sized chunk of it, working on a smaller portion, and then if I like where it's going, I'll proceed with the rest of it. So I think it's getting fairly close to feeling somewhat Frankenstein feeling with that nose and the lip shape and the downturned eyes. So I'm going to move over here in a second to the actual full-on concepting phase where I'm going to tweak this into its actual posed out asymmetrical version of the character. So just a little bit more tweaking there, and I have come up with this shape here. So now I'm really going to just not use any symmetry here and really start to push and pull on this to come up with this concept here. So I don't go too far at once with these proportion changes. It's really small brush movements at a time so I don't distort the forms too much. I'll kind of tug on little areas a little bit at a time to kind of slowly and gradually push them into position. And I often like to sculpt with the smooth shading in Mudbox turned off so I can, the faceting of these faces gives it the surface a little bit of specular variation, almost like a little bit of tooth to it to allow me to see it a little bit better at these subdivision levels. So now I'm just working out this sort of incision in stapled area that's going to tug on the lower portion of his right eye and tug up on the top portion of his the right portion of his top lip. And then sorting out here where these incisions are going to be potentially two different ears have been um, stitched onto this head. So we have full circular incisions around the ears. And now just defining a little bit more of this eye shape. And slowly bringing up some of the bulk and some of the fat underneath the skin. Maybe he's also a little bit, some areas maybe a little bit swollen due to surgical procedures. So I thought it'd be cool to have, maybe these different portions of different people's faces all sort of stitched on. So I have this nice incision of the whole neck. And most of this sculpting phase is pretty self-explanatory in terms of what's actually going on. It's really sculpting, looking for forms, looking at reference material, and a lot of push and pull. I don't necessarily get all of this stuff correct on the first go around. There is a substantial amount of experimentation and tweaking and back and forth, pushing and pulling to get it to where I want it to go. Unfortunately, from the perspective of a instructional content, it's not really plausible to show every single bit of experimentation. Sometimes that can get a little bit boring, a little bit redundant to see a lot of the experimentation phase, but there often is with all of my work some level of time-consuming experimentation of pushing, pulling, scrapping things, taking a few steps back, reworking things. And it's never really a linear process from start to finish. There's always this um, doing a little work on the sculpt here, then potentially starting to do some test renders to see how things are looking, maybe throw down some base color to sort of see how it's all coming together. Generally, I don't work in this straight on 100% start to finish linear fashion, even though the instructional content here sort of by nature has to be laid out in this linear fashion. The work really is anything but linear. It's again a lot of experimentation, a lot of back and forth, a lot of push and pull. So I often am looking at for a lot of this stuff, looking at anatomical reference. How where the Adam's apple is and the structure of the neck muscles. Here I'm just trying to block out from a distance, just turn the lights off here in Mudbox and take a look at the silhouette to see how the location and positioning of that bolt through his neck, sort of the classic Frankenstein with the bolt through the neck. And again, this concept sculpt is going to be more focused on this lower subdivision level to really lock in and figure out where these details are going to be. I don't want to necessarily show taking this to 100% completion and then resurface it and then go and do the full-on sculpt and sort of show all of this stuff over again. So the this is really just to lock in the main forms, and then we'll move on to resurfacing and then the final full-on sculpt.